For this chapter, your calculator is going to be your best friend. I have on the screen right now, here's how you can type these in your calculator. Make sure that you know in your specific scientific calculator how to type it in. Now what I have written down here is for the standard TI scientific calculator. So if yours is a Casio or you're using something different than this button right here, make sure you come see me before the test, because a lot of these things you can either do in your calculator or use your calculator to check. So make sure you know how to do this. Also, if you have a graphing calculator, so one of the bigger ones that you can graph a line, make sure you know how to use it in a graphing calculator. So the buttons look a little different, but they do the same thing. So below the dash line, down here, below this line, I've given you an example to type in, and above is how to type it in. Alright, so our first example is going to be sorting rational, irrational, and non-real. So rational means it can be written as a fraction. So you may want to make a note somewhere that rational numbers anything that can be written as a fraction. So whole numbers are rational because you can write the number 5 as a fraction by doing 5 over 1. 1/2 is irrational. Any decimal that stops or repeats is a rational number because it can be written as a fraction. Irrational numbers are those that can't be written as a fraction. So these will always be decimals, so they are going to be non-terminating and non-repeating. So anything that looks crazy and takes up the whole screen is probably an irrational. And then non-real just means that it's not going to be recognized by your calculator at all. It's going to have something what's called an I, and we'll learn about that at the end of the chapter. So you have those those 3 types of numbers. So non-reals won't be recognized by your calculator. Now, how to tell the difference. So there will be several questions in your homework that will ask you to determine if a radical is rational, irrational, or non-real. The easiest way is to put the radical in your calculator and see, is it a terminating decimal or a whole number or a fraction? Is it repeating? Then it's irrational. If it's non-repeating or non-terminating, that's your irrational. Or if your calculator says error, non-real answer, or something along those lines, that's your non-real. So for this first one, the square root of 41, I'm going to put that thing in my calculator, and I get out 6.403124237. So what that tells me, that thing doesn't stop. It doesn't end, it doesn't repeat, it's these crazy string of decimals, so most likely it is a irrational number. Now the way I can check that for certain is if I do the fraction to decimal button, I'm telling my calculator, hey, convert this decimal to a fraction, it comes out with the same exact number. So that's how I know that it's definitely an irrational number. It cannot be written as a fraction. So my next one, the square root of 49, hopefully you know this, but I type that in my calculator and I get out 7. Well, 7 can be written as a fraction, right? 7 over 1, so it is a rational number. The last one, square root of negative 40, type that thing in, put the negative sign inside the radical, and my calculator says domain error. Yours may say something else similar to that, but if you get an error, that's going to be your non-real answer. And the reason is I cannot have a negative number under a square root. It's impossible for us right now. We're going to learn how to handle it, but we don't know how to handle it right now. So if you have a negative under a square root, not a cubed root, under a square root, so something that doesn't have a number right here, just a plain old radical sign, that is going to be your non-real answer. So those are your three types of numbers: irrational, rational, and non-real. Alright, so my last two examples are just kind of some straightforward computational. So the square root of 1 over 16. This is just some number, so the easiest way is going to be to put this in my calculator. The way I would is the square root key, parenthesis 1 divided by 16, close parenthesis. And we'll learn a property as to how to actually do this in our head. So I got the decimal 0.25, but because that thing was given as a fraction, I'm going to want to convert my answer to a fraction. So I'm going to do my second F to D button, which will give me 1 over 4. Now you may notice that, okay, the answer is 1 over 4. Well, if I take the square root of 1 and the square root of 16, I get 1 over 4. And you're right, because the property says that you can break up a radical to top and bottom. So I can say that's the square root of 1 divided by the square root of 16, which will give me 1 over 4. That's how the calculator got the answer. Square root the top, square root the bottom, and then it gives you out your answer. And then you don't have to do this converting F to D stuff. Alright, so my second example, my last example, says the cubed root of negative 27. So the reason I know it's a cubed root is because I've got a 3 there. So that tells me it's not a square root, it's a cubed root. So I'm looking for what number cubed gives me negative 27. Now think back up here where we had these non-real things. And I said that you cannot have a negative under a square root. That is true. You can have a negative under a cubed root, because I can get out negative numbers when I cube things. I can't get out negative numbers when I square them. So this negative is okay. So you may want to make a note that you can have a negative under a cubed root, just not a square root. So I'm looking for, okay, what number cubed is 27? Well, 3 cubed gets me 27, because 3 times 3 times 3 is 3 times 3, which is 9, times 3, which is 27. Now the way I get to negative 27 is to stick a negative sign in front. So negative 3 cubed is 27. And again, your calculator will do this. The very first table I showed you was how you can type in other roots than square roots into your calculator. And I'll go over it in class too. Again, make sure you know how to do it in your calculator. Alright, so our last example is the square root of negative 100. If for some reason you forget and you type this in your calculator, it would tell you a domain error, but you don't see a number, it's a 2, so this is a square root, and you cannot have negatives under square roots. Make sure you know that. So this is a non-real answer.